Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. I'm your host Ian, and today we're diving into how the Bank of Canada battled runaway inflation in the 80s and 90s, the tough medicine that they used, and the big policy shift that followed. Let's break it down step by step. First, let's set the scene. The 1970s were rough for economies worldwide, and Canada was no exception. Global oil shock from OPEC production cuts sent energy prices soaring. And that fed into everything from groceries to manufacturing costs. Inflation, which is basically the rate at which prices rise, started climbing steadily. By the late 1970s, it was in double digits here in Canada. Consumer price inflation rose to 12.9% in 1981. Wages just couldn't keep up, and uncertainty rippled through businesses and households. Now, the Bank of Canada, our central bank responsible for monetary policy, had to act. Their main tool? Well, it was interest rates. By hiking rates, they make borrowing more expensive, which slows down spending and investment, cooling off the economy and hopefully taming inflation. But in the early 1980s, they really just went all in. In 1981, the bank rate, the key interest rate they set, shot up to over 21%. Mortgage rates followed suit, with 5-year fixed rates hitting 21.75% that summer. If you were buying a home back then, that meant crippling pain. Imagine that today, 21.75% on your mortgage. Real estate markets froze. People couldn't afford to borrow and sales plummeted. The big question though is, did it work on inflation? Well, yeah, eventually. Those hikes crushed demand and inflation started falling, but the cost was steep. The economy plunged into a deep recession from 1981 to 1982. Unemployment soared, businesses closed, and it felt like a brutal trade-off. You get to slay the inflation dragon, but burn down parts of the village in the process. This wasn't unique to Canada either. Most countries faced similar pain, but our central bank's aggressive stance made the downturn sharper here. Now, fast forward to the late 1980s and early 1990s, and history started to repeat itself. Inflation was creeping up, hitting around 7% by 1990. Factors like rising energy costs and strong economic growth played a role, but the Bank of Canada wasn't about to let it spiral again. They cranked up rates once more, pushing the prime rate to 14.75% in June 1990. Again, borrowing costs exploded and the real estate sector took a massive hit. Home prices stalled and foreclosures rose as people struggled with higher mortgage renewals. This time, the recession that followed was even more prolonged, lasting into the early 1990s. Unemployment hit double digits and it exposed flaws in the old approach. Sure, high rates beat back inflation, but at what price? The economy suffered unnecessary volatility, with booms followed by busts that hurt everyday Canadians, lost jobs, bankruptcies, and delayed dreams of home ownership. It was clear something had to change. Policymakers had tried other tactics before, like wage and price controls in the 1970s, but those just delayed the problem. Targeting money supply growth didn't work either, as it was hard to predict and control. So, in February 1991, the Bank of Canada and the federal government made a landmark decision. They adopted an explicit inflation targeting. Canada became the second country in the world to do this, right after New Zealand. The idea was simple, yet revolutionary. Set a clear, public target for inflation and commit to hitting it. They started with a goal of reducing inflation to just 3% by the end of 1992, then down to 2% by 1995. With a range of 1 to 3% around it. Why 2%, you might ask? Well, it was low enough to avoid the distortion of high inflation, like eroding savings and unpredictable costs, but not zero, which could risk deflation and stagnant growth. It gave the economy room to breathe while anchoring expectations. With this shift, businesses and consumers could plan ahead knowing inflation would stay low and stay stable. The bank used interest rates more proactively but less extremely, adjusting them to keep inflation in check without slamming the brakes when things really rose. And it worked. Since 1991, inflation has averaged very close to 2%. Now, this has been huge for stability, helping Canada weather storms like the 2008 financial crisis and even the recent post-pandemic inflation spike without repeating the deep recessions of the past. It made monetary policy transparent and accountable, fostering trust. For real estate, stable low inflation means more predictable mortgage rates, which supports steady housing markets over time. No more 21% shocks derailing everything. But it's still not perfect. Critics argue the 2% target might need tweaking in the changing world. But so far, the bank has stuck with it, renewing the agreement every 5 years. As of today in 2025, it's still the cornerstone of our policy. Looking back, taming inflation at all costs in the 80s and 90s showed the dangers of reactive extreme measures. The 1991 shift to targeting has stabilized our economy, making it more resilient for investors and homeowners and everyone in between. Thanks for joining me today. Hit like if this helped. Subscribe for more deep dives into Canada's economy and its history. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you on the next one.